On a busy Monday morning at the Jefferson County Courthouse, heads turned as Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old man with neatly combed dark hair and wearing a carefully pressed Navy suit, walked through the metal detectors. What caught everyone's attention wasn't his polished appearance, but rather the tiny bundle he carried in his arms, a small baby, no more than 6 months old, dressed in a pale yellow onesie. The security guards exchanged puzzled glances as Thompson gently bounced the infant while juggling a diaper bag and his briefcase. It was unusual enough to see a baby in the courthouse, but even more strange given that Thompson was scheduled to appear before Judge Sarah Mitchell on serious charges of financial fraud. As Thompson made his way to courtroom 305, whispers followed him through the marble hallways. The baby, peaceful and quiet, occasionally cooed and reached out with tiny fingers to grab at Thompson's striped tie. To casual observers, he appeared to be a devoted father, tenderly caring for his child while facing what must be a difficult day in court. The courthouse regulars, clerks, attorneys, and bailiffs who had seen every kind of scheme and story watched with varying degrees of skepticism. Linda Martinez, a veteran court clerk of 15 years, observed Thompson from her desk as he settled into a bench outside the courtroom. Something about the scene didn't sit right with her experienced eyes. In all my years here, Linda later told her colleagues, I've never seen a defendant bring a baby to their own fraud hearing, especially not one who's facing charges as serious as his. Inside the courtroom, final preparations were underway for the day's proceedings. Judge Sarah Mitchell, known throughout the county for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach, was reviewing the day's cases in her chambers. Her assistant brought her attention to the unusual situation developing in her courtroom. Your Honor, the assistant said, the Thompson fraud case is up first, but there's something you should know. He's brought an infant with him. Judge Mitchell paused, lowering her reading glasses. In her 20 years on the bench, she had developed an almost uncanny ability to spot manipulation tactics. This situation immediately raised red flags. Meanwhile, Thompson had positioned himself strategically in the front row of the courtroom. The baby was now awake, those big innocent eyes scanning the room with natural curiosity. Several female jurors, who had just entered and were taking their seats, couldn't help but smile at the infant. Thompson returned their smiles with what appeared to be a weary, grateful expression, the perfect picture of a struggling single father. The prosecutor, James Chen, watched this performance with growing concern. He had spent months building a solid case against Thompson, who was accused of orchestrating a sophisticated investment scam that had robbed retirees of their life savings. The presence of the baby threatened to derail the carefully planned prosecution strategy by garnering sympathy from the jury. As the bailiff called the court to order, Thompson stood, carefully adjusting the baby in his arms. The infant, as if on cue, let out a soft whimper. Several jurors visibly softened at the sound, exactly the reaction Thompson appeared to be counting on. What nobody in the courtroom yet realized was that this was merely the opening act of an elaborate performance. The baby, whose presence seemed so innocent and touching, was about to become the centerpiece of one of the most brazen attempts to manipulate the justice system that Jefferson County had ever seen. A court officer named Michael Reeves, standing near the back of the courtroom, noticed something odd about Thompson's interaction with the child. Despite his seemingly caring gestures, there was something mechanical about his movements, as if he was following a script rather than responding to the natural rhythms of caring for an infant. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Judge Mitchell was about to begin proceedings that would expose a scheme more calculating than anyone could have anticipated. As she entered the courtroom and took her place at the bench, her experienced eyes immediately began analyzing the scene before her, picking up on subtle details that others might miss. The morning sun filtered through the high courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the room, as the clerk announced, "The State versus Marcus Thompson, case number 2025 CR 789, the Honorable Judge Sarah Mitchell presiding." The baby gurgled softly, and Thompson's grip on the infant tightened ever so slightly as he rose to face the judge. The extraordinary events that would unfold over the next few hours were about to begin, and not a single person in that courtroom could have predicted just how this unusual situation would ultimately resolve itself. Judge Sarah Mitchell's courtroom fell silent as she observed Marcus Thompson and the infant from her elevated bench. With 30 years of experience, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people, and something about Thompson's demeanor set off immediate alarm bells in her mind. As the preliminary proceedings began, the judge noticed subtle inconsistencies in Thompson's behavior. When the baby started to fuss, his responses seemed rehearsed, almost theatrical. He would look anxiously at the jury before tending to the child, as if ensuring his actions had an audience. His movements lacked the natural, instinctive quality that most parents displayed. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Mitchell addressed him directly, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "I see you brought an infant to these proceedings. Would you care to explain why?" Thompson rose slowly, cradling the baby with what appeared to be practiced care. "Your Honor," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I'm a single father. My babysitter canceled last minute, and I had no other options." The baby chose that moment to whimper, and Thompson quickly offered a pacifier, drawing sympathetic looks from several jurors. Assistant District Attorney James Chen watched the scene unfold with growing frustration. His carefully prepared case against Thompson's investment fraud scheme seemed to be losing impact as the defendant played the role of struggling single father. Chen had spent months gathering evidence of how Thompson had systematically deceived elderly investors, but now the jury's attention was focused on the baby's every movement. During a brief pause in proceedings, Judge Mitchell noticed something that others might have missed. When Court Officer Michael Reeves approached Thompson with some paperwork, the baby reached out toward Reeves with a familiarity that seemed odd for a child who should have been primarily bonded to their father. The judge's suspicion deepened when she observed Thompson during an unguarded moment. As he thought no one was watching, his interaction with the infant became mechanical, almost detached. It was a stark contrast to his performance when he knew eyes were on him. Linda Martinez, the experienced court clerk, had been quietly taking notes of her own. She noticed that Thompson seemed unfamiliar with the contents of the diaper bag he brought. When the baby needed changing, he fumbled with the supplies as if he'd never done it before, though he tried to mask his uncertainty with exaggerated movements of parental concern. "Your Honor," Chen requested during a sidebar, "I have concerns about the presence of this child being used to influence the jury." Judge Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. "I share your concerns, Mr. Chen. There's something not quite right about this situation." The morning proceeded with the presentation of evidence against Thompson. The prosecution detailed how he had created a fake investment firm, promising unrealistic returns to retired seniors looking to secure their future. As Chen presented document after document showing the trail of deception, Thompson would occasionally stand to soothe the baby, effectively breaking the momentum of damaging testimony. During one such interruption, Judge Mitchell noticed something else peculiar. The baby was wearing a hospital identification bracelet that was partially visible beneath the sleeve of the yellow onesie. Thompson had made no mention of any recent hospital visits, and the bracelet appeared new. The judge discreetly summoned her clerk. "Ms. Martinez, please contact the local hospitals. I want to know if they have any record of this infant being admitted recently." As the morning session continued, more subtle inconsistencies emerged. Thompson seemed unable to answer basic questions about the baby's routine when the judge inquired. His responses were vague and evasive, speaking in generalities rather than with the specific knowledge a parent would have. The gallery had filled with spectators, drawn by the unusual sight of a fraud trial featuring an infant. Among them, an elderly woman in the back row watched with particular intensity. She had been taking notes throughout the morning, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Judge Mitchell noticed the woman and made a mental note to have court security discover her identity during the lunch recess. Years of experience had taught her that sometimes the most important clues came from unexpected sources. As the morning session drew to a close, the judge had formed a clear plan of action. She would use the lunch break to set several inquiries in motion. Thompson's performance as a doting father might have swayed some observers, but Judge Mitchell was convinced she was watching an elaborate deception unfold in her courtroom. During the lunch recess, Judge Mitchell's chambers buzzed with activity as her staff began digging into Marcus Thompson's background. What they uncovered painted a disturbing pattern of deception that stretched back years before the current fraud charges. Linda Martinez, the court clerk, spread out a stack of files on the judge's desk. "Your Honor, we found something interesting. This isn't Thompson's first time using emotional manipulation in court." She pulled out a case file from 3 years ago in a neighboring county. He appeared as a character witness in a fraud case, claiming to be caring for his terminally ill mother. The court later discovered his mother had passed away 5 years before that. Meanwhile, Assistant District Attorney Chen had been making calls to every hospital within 50 miles. The baby's identification bracelet had led them to St. Mary's Hospital, but what they discovered wasn't what Thompson had implied. The hospital had no record of treating any infant connected to Marcus Thompson. The elderly woman from the gallery had been identified as Margaret Wilson, a former victim of one of Thompson's earlier schemes. When interviewed during the break, she revealed a crucial piece of information. "I remember him from 2 years ago," she said, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. "He came to our retirement community investment seminar with a different story then. He showed us pictures of his sick daughter who needed expensive medical treatment. Many of us invested our savings to help him. There was no sick daughter." Court Officer Michael Reeves returned from his own investigation with more damning evidence. He had contacted Thompson's listed address and spoke with neighbors. "None of them have ever seen him with a baby," Reeves reported. "In fact, they say he lives alone and is rarely home." The prosecution team uncovered records showing Thompson's sophisticated pattern of fraud. He had created multiple fake personas and companies, each time using emotional appeals to gain trust. There were the cancer patient support groups he had infiltrated, claiming to be raising funds for research. The veterans' organizations he had approached with stories of being a wounded warrior. Each time, he had crafted his appearance and story to match what would generate the most sympathy. Judge Mitchell studied surveillance photos from Thompson's investment seminars. In each one, he appeared differently, sometimes wearing glasses, sometimes with a slight limp, always with a carefully crafted story designed to appeal to his target audience's emotions. The evidence of his current investment scheme was equally calculating. Thompson had created elaborately forged documents showing his fake investment firm's spectacular returns. He had targeted retirement communities, presenting himself as a financial advisor who specialized in helping seniors secure their futures. The promised returns were impossible, 30% guaranteed annual returns with no risk, but his emotional manipulation had convinced many to trust him. One victim's statement particularly stood out. "He showed us pictures of his family," the statement read. "Told us about his children's college funds, how he had helped his parents retire comfortably. He seemed so genuine, so caring, we trusted him with our life savings." As the lunch break neared its end, Judge Mitchell's suspicions about the baby in her courtroom had grown into near certainty. Thompson's pattern was clear. He used whatever emotional leverage he could find to manipulate people's trust and sympathy. The prosecutor added another disturbing detail to the growing pile of evidence. Thompson's bank records showed a series of recent cash withdrawals, including one for $500 made just 2 days ago. "We believe he may have paid someone to use their child for today's hearing," Chen suggested. Judge Mitchell sat back in her chair, processing all the information. The pattern was clear. Thompson was a master manipulator who had spent years perfecting his techniques. The baby in her courtroom was just his latest prop in a long series of emotional manipulation tactics. As the court prepared to reconvene, she made notes for specific questions she planned to ask. The afternoon session would need to be handled carefully. If her suspicions were correct, there was more at stake than just Thompson's fraud charges. The welfare of the infant had become a pressing concern. The courthouse bells chimed, signaling the end of the lunch recess. Judge Mitchell gathered her notes, her expression resolute. The time had come to confront Thompson with the truth about his past, and more importantly, to uncover the real story behind the baby he had brought to court. During the afternoon recess, an unexpected discovery unfolded in the courthouse hallways. Court Officer Michael Reeves, taking his usual security rounds, noticed something peculiar about Thompson's behavior outside the courtroom. The defendant, who had been playing the role of devoted father inside, was displaying a completely different pattern when he thought no one was watching. From his discreet observation point, Reeves watched as Thompson approached different women in the hallway, each time with a slightly altered story. To a young lawyer waiting for her case to be called, Thompson presented himself as a widowed father struggling with the justice system. To a social worker from Family Services, he claimed to be fighting for custody rights. With each encounter, the baby served as a perfect conversation starter, drawing immediate sympathy from everyone he approached. Sarah Jenkins, a paralegal from the 3rd floor, reported a strange interaction to security. "He told me he was a single father facing eviction," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. But 20 minutes later, I overheard him telling another woman he was a widower fighting insurance companies over his wife's medical bills. Something didn't add up. The courthouse security cameras caught Thompson passing the baby to at least 3 different women during the break. Each time, he used the opportunity to build a different narrative, carefully gauging their reactions and adjusting his story accordingly. The footage showed him watching their faces intently, like an actor testing different versions of a scene. Linda Martinez, observing from her desk near the water fountain, noticed how Thompson's demeanor changed dramatically when he thought no one was paying attention. The tender, careful movements he displayed in the courtroom became rushed and awkward. The baby, who had been so contentedly quiet during the proceedings, now seemed increasingly distressed. "Watch how he handles the diaper bag," Martinez whispered to Officer Reeves. Indeed, Thompson kept checking a small notebook hidden inside, as if reviewing scripts for his various performances. His interactions with the baby appeared to follow a precise set of rehearsed movements, lacking the natural flow of genuine parental care. A crucial moment came when Thompson encountered Maria Rodriguez, a court translator, near the vending machines. The baby immediately brightened at the sight of her, reaching out with recognition that seemed far too familiar for a stranger. Thompson quickly turned away, but not before several witnesses noticed the infant's reaction. Meanwhile, Judge Mitchell's clerk had been quietly documenting these hallway interactions. The pattern was clear. Thompson was using the baby as a prop in an elaborate performance, adapting his story to whatever would generate the most sympathy from each new audience. The most telling incident occurred when Thompson thought he was alone in the empty jury room, where he had been permitted to feed the baby. Through the partially open door, Officer Reeves observed him making a phone call. "It's working perfectly," Thompson was heard saying. "You should see their faces when I tell them about being a single father. The jury's eating it up. Just make sure she stays quiet about the arrangement until after the verdict." During this time, the prosecution team noticed something else significant. Every time Thompson engaged in one of these hallway conversations, he positioned himself near people who were potential character witnesses or had connections to social services. It appeared he was laying groundwork for possible testimony about his character as a devoted father. The courthouse cleaning staff provided another crucial piece of information. They had observed Thompson arriving early that morning, meeting briefly with a woman in the parking lot who handed him the baby and a bag of supplies. The exchange had been quick and businesslike, nothing like the warm interaction you'd expect from a father receiving his child from a caregiver. As the afternoon session approached, all these observations were quietly reported to Judge Mitchell. The evidence of Thompson's manipulation was mounting, but the judge knew she needed to handle the situation delicately. The welfare of the infant was her primary concern, and she needed to ensure any action taken wouldn't cause distress to the child. The courthouse clock struck 3, signaling the end of the recess. As people filed back into the courtroom, Thompson resumed his performance as the doting father, but now multiple pairs of eyes watched him with new understanding. The carefully crafted facade was beginning to crack, and the truth was about to emerge in ways he hadn't anticipated. As the afternoon session was about to begin, Judge Mitchell quietly ordered a discreet investigation into the baby's identity. She dispatched 2 court officers to work with local authorities while maintaining the appearance of normal court proceedings. Detective Sarah Cooper, known for her expertise in fraud cases, arrived at the courthouse within 30 minutes of receiving the judge's call. Working from a small conference room converted into a temporary command center, she began piecing together the mystery of the infant's true identity. The first breakthrough came from the hospital bracelet. After cross-referencing recent birth records, they discovered the baby's name, Sofia Rodriguez, born 6 months ago at St. Mary's Hospital. However, the birth certificate listed no connection to Marcus Thompson. Meanwhile, courthouse security cameras revealed more telling evidence. The footage from early morning showed Thompson arriving in a silver sedan. A young woman, later identified as Elena Rodriguez, was seen handing him the baby and a diaper bag in the parking lot at 7:15 a.m. The exchange looked rehearsed and businesslike, nothing like a normal childcare handoff. Detective Cooper's team tracked down Elena Rodriguez's address through the hospital records. They found a small apartment in the east side of the city, where neighbors confirmed she lived with her infant daughter. One neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, provided crucial information. "Elena's been worried about money lately," Mrs. Garcia told the investigators. Yesterday, she was excited about earning some quick cash, said something about helping someone with a court appearance. I thought it was strange, but she assured me it was legal. Bank records showed a cash deposit of $500 into Elena's account the previous day, matching the withdrawal from Thompson's account. Text messages recovered from Elena's phone revealed the arrangement. Thompson had promised her the money in exchange for borrowing Sophia for his court appearance, plus an additional $1,000 if he received a favorable verdict. The investigation team discovered that Thompson had found Elena through a local parenting group's Facebook page where she had posted about her financial struggles. He had approached her with what seemed like a simple proposition: let him borrow the baby for one day to help with a legal matter. He had convinced her it was perfectly legal and would help them both. As Detective Cooper dug deeper, she found Elena's own legal troubles. She was facing eviction and had a pending court date the following week. Thompson had promised to help her find a lawyer who would take her case pro bono, another manipulation tactic to ensure her cooperation. By mid-afternoon, the team had assembled enough evidence to prove that Thompson had essentially rented the baby for his court appearance. They also uncovered something more disturbing. This wasn't the first time he had attempted such a scheme. Records from another county showed he had tried to hire a different mother and baby 3 months ago, but she had backed out at the last minute. Elena Rodriguez was located at her workplace, a small diner where she worked as a waitress. When confronted with the evidence, she broke down in tears. He made it sound so simple, she sobbed to Detective Cooper. Just one day, he said. He told me he was fighting for justice, that he needed to show he was a family man. I never meant to do anything wrong. The detective's report to Judge Mitchell was comprehensive. It detailed how Thompson had meticulously planned this deception, from selecting a mother in financial distress to coaching her on what to say if questioned. He had even created fake documents showing he had temporary guardianship of the child. Most concerning was the discovery that Thompson had approached 3 other mothers before finding Elena, each time refining his pitch. He had targeted single mothers in financial difficulty, offering them what seemed like an easy solution to their problems. As the evidence mounted in the small conference room, Judge Mitchell reviewed each document with growing concern. The manipulation of not just the court, but of a struggling single mother and her infant, added a new layer of severity to Thompson's charges. By 3:30 p.m., everything was in place. Court officers were dispatched to ensure Elena's safety and to arrange for her immediate return to the courthouse. The judge prepared to confront Thompson with the evidence, knowing that the next few moments would dramatically change the course of the trial. The courthouse halls buzzed with quiet anticipation as everyone waited for the judge's next move. Thompson, still playing his role in the courtroom, remained unaware that his carefully constructed scheme was about to unravel completely. The courthouse atmosphere grew tense as Elena Rodriguez was escorted into Judge Mitchell's chambers. Wearing her diner uniform and visibly shaking, the 23-year-old single mother could barely meet the judge's eyes. Court officer Michael Reeves had brought her directly from her workplace, where she'd been mid-shift when the investigators found her. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Mitchell began gently, I need you to tell me exactly how Mr. Thompson convinced you to let him use your baby in my courtroom. Elena's story spilled out between sobs. She described how she'd been working double shifts at the diner, barely making ends meet, when Thompson approached her through a single parents' Facebook group. He presented himself as a legal advocate who helped struggling parents, claiming he understood their challenges firsthand. He made it sound so innocent, Elena explained, twisting her apron in her hands. He said he was fighting against corrupt banks that prey on poor families. Said having a baby in court would show he was trustworthy, that he was one of us. I just needed the money so badly. The details of Thompson's manipulation emerged. He had met Elena several times, carefully building her trust. He showed her fake testimonials from other parents he'd supposedly helped, presented himself as a crusader for social justice, and promised to help with her pending eviction case. He gave me specific instructions, Elena continued. What to say if anyone asked questions, how to explain why I let him take Sophia. He even made me practice the story about being his baby's regular sitter. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I never should have trusted him. Assistant District Attorney Chen, present for the testimony, asked about the payment arrangement. Elena revealed that Thompson had given her $500 upfront, with promises of more money and legal help once he won his case. He had convinced her that lending her baby for the court appearance was no different than letting a family member babysit. "Did Mr. Thompson tell you what his court case was actually about?" Judge Mitchell asked. "No, Your Honor," Elena replied. "He just said he was fighting for financial justice. I found out about the fraud charges just now from the detective. If I had known he was accused of stealing from elderly people." Her voice trailed off as fresh guilt overwhelmed her. The judge's chambers fell silent as Elena described how Thompson had coached her on every detail. He had insisted she bring Sophia to the courthouse early in the morning to avoid being seen. He had given her a script to follow if questioned by authorities. He had even selected the yellow onesie Sophia wore, saying it would appeal to the jury. Linda Martinez, taking notes of the testimony, noticed how Elena's demeanor changed when talking about her daughter. Despite her poor judgment in trusting Thompson, her genuine love for her child was evident in every word and gesture. "I just want my baby back," Elena pleaded. "I know what I did was wrong. I'll accept whatever punishment I deserve, but please, I need to hold my daughter." Judge Mitchell assured her that Sophia would be returned to her custody immediately, but explained that there would be consequences for her role in attempting to deceive the court. Elena nodded, accepting responsibility through her tears. As Elena's testimony concluded, the full scope of Thompson's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just exploited elderly investors. He had preyed on a vulnerable young mother's desperation, using her and her infant as props in his elaborate performance. The judge ordered a brief recess to consider how to proceed. Elena was escorted to a private room where she could be reunited with Sophia, while court officers prepared to confront Thompson with this new evidence. Outside the judge's chambers, the news of Elena's testimony spread quickly through the courthouse. The sympathy that Thompson had carefully cultivated among the jury and spectators was rapidly transforming into disgust as the true nature of his deception came to light. The stage was set for Thompson's final act in the courtroom, but this time the script would not be his to control. Judge Mitchell prepared to return to the bench, armed with the truth that would expose his most brazen manipulation yet. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Judge Mitchell returned to the bench. Thompson sat confidently at the defense table, still cradling baby Sophia, completely unaware that his scheme had been exposed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the high windows as the judge prepared to confront him with the truth. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Mitchell's voice cut through the silence, "please approach the bench with the infant." As Thompson stood, straightening his tie with one hand while holding Sophia in the other, the courtroom doors opened. Alana Rodriguez entered, escorted by Officer Reeves. The moment Sophia saw her mother, the baby began reaching toward her and crying, a natural reaction that completely contradicted Thompson's claim of being the child's father. "Your Honor, I can explain," Thompson began, but Judge Mitchell raised her hand to silence him. "Mr. Thompson, we have extensive evidence of your arrangement with Ms. Rodriguez," the judge stated firmly. "We have the text messages, the bank transfers, and Ms. Rodriguez's full confession. Would you like to revise your statements to this court?" The color drained from Thompson's face as he realized his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. His hands began to tremble, causing Sophia to cry louder. Elena stepped forward, her eyes fixed on her daughter. Assistant District Attorney Chen stood, presenting the evidence they had gathered during the recess. "Your Honor, we have documentation of Mr. Thompson's systematic approach to finding a baby to use in court. He approached multiple mothers before convincing Ms. Rodriguez to participate in this scheme." The jury watched in shock as Chen displayed the text messages, bank records, and surveillance footage on the courtroom screen. Thompson's meticulous planning was laid bare, from his calculated approach to vulnerable single mothers to his rehearsed performances in the courthouse hallways. Furthermore, Chen continued, "We have evidence of Mr. Thompson attempting similar manipulations in other courts, including the false claims about a terminally ill mother and a non-existent sick daughter." Thompson's defense attorney, realizing the gravity of the situation, requested a brief conference with his client, but before they could step aside, Thompson's composure finally broke. "Everything in this system is rigged against the common man," he shouted, his calm demeanor vanishing entirely. "I did what I had to do to level the playing field." Judge Mitchell banged her gavel. "Officer Reeves, please take the baby from Mr. Thompson and return her to Ms. Rodriguez." As Sophia was reunited with her mother, the contrast between Elena's genuine maternal affection and Thompson's practiced performance became starkly apparent to everyone in the courtroom. The baby immediately calmed in her mother's arms, but Thompson stood alone, his deception exposed. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Mitchell's voice was steel, "not only have you attempted to manipulate this court through an elaborate deception, but you have exploited a vulnerable mother and used an innocent child as a prop in your scheme. This shows a level of calculation that severely aggravates your original charges." The jury members, who had earlier shown sympathy toward Thompson, now viewed him with unveiled disgust. Several of them took notes as the judge detailed how he had orchestrated the entire performance. Thompson's defense attorney attempted to mitigate the damage, arguing that his client's actions showed desperation rather than malice, but the evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. The text messages revealed weeks of planning, multiple attempts to recruit different mothers, and detailed scripts for various scenarios. "Your Honor," Chen addressed the court, "the prosecution moves to add charges of attempted fraud upon the court and conspiracy to commit deception to the existing charges." Judge Mitchell nodded, then turned her attention to Thompson, who stood rigid and pale before her. "Mr. Thompson, you have demonstrated not only a complete disregard for the truth, but a willingness to exploit vulnerable members of our community, including an innocent child, to escape the consequences of your actions." The afternoon light had faded to dusk as the judge prepared to announce her decision on the new charges. In the gallery, Elena held Sophia close, her tears now dried, watching as justice prepared to address not only Thompson's financial crimes, but also his manipulation of her and her daughter. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for the judge's next words, while Thompson finally faced the reality that his greatest performance had become his most damaging confession. The tension in courtroom 305 was palpable as Judge Mitchell prepared to deliver her final verdict. Marcus Thompson stood before the bench, his previously confident demeanor now completely shattered. The empty baby carrier beside his chair served as a stark reminder of his failed manipulation. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Mitchell began, her voice carrying throughout the hushed courtroom, "this court has witnessed one of the most calculated attempts at manipulation I have seen in my 20 years on the bench. Your original charges of defrauding elderly investors of their life savings were serious enough, but your attempt to manipulate this court by exploiting a vulnerable mother and her infant daughter demonstrates a level of moral corruption that this court cannot ignore." The judge paused, reviewing the extensive documentation before her. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across her face as she continued. "For the original charges of financial fraud, this court finds you guilty on all counts. The evidence clearly shows you orchestrated a scheme that stole $2.5 million from retired individuals who trusted you with their life savings. For these crimes alone, you would face significant prison time." Thompson shifted uncomfortably as the judge continued. "However, your actions during this trial have added several aggravating factors. You attempted to corrupt the judicial process itself. You exploited Ms. Rodriguez's financial desperation, using her vulnerable situation to further your deception. You used an innocent child as a prop in your elaborate performance, showing complete disregard for her well-being." In the gallery, Elena Rodriguez sat with Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms. Her eyes were fixed on Thompson, the man who had manipulated her desperate situation for his own gain. Therefore, Judge Mitchell declared, "For the original charges of financial fraud, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison. For the attempted manipulation of this court and conspiracy to commit fraud upon the court, you will serve an additional 3 years to run consecutively." A murmur ran through the courtroom as the sentence was announced. Thompson's shoulders slumped visibly. Furthermore, the judge continued, "You are ordered to make full restitution to all victims of your investment scheme, totaling $2.5 million. You'll also pay a fine of $100,000 for attempting to corrupt judicial proceedings." Turning her attention to Elena Rodriguez, the judge's tone softened slightly. "Ms. Rodriguez, while your participation in this scheme cannot be overlooked, this court recognizes that you were yourself a victim of Mr. Thompson's manipulation. You will serve 100 hours of community service, and you must complete a court-approved parenting class." Elena nodded tearfully, holding Sophia closer. "Let the record show," Judge Mitchell concluded, "that this case serves as a warning to anyone who would attempt to manipulate this court. Justice may be blind, but it sees through deception. As court officers approached Thompson to take him into custody, his facade finally crumpled completely. "I just wanted a chance," he muttered, but his words were lost in the shuffling of feet and the clinking of handcuffs. The elderly victims of Thompson's investment scheme, who had attended the trial, watched with grim satisfaction as he was led away. Margaret Wilson, who had lost her entire retirement savings to Thompson's scheme, wiped away tears of relief. Linda Martinez, the court clerk who had first noticed the inconsistencies in Thompson's behavior, began gathering the day's documentation. The case would surely be referenced in law schools for years to come as an example of justice prevailing over elaborate deception. Outside the courthouse, as the sun set over the city, Elena Rodriguez prepared to take her daughter home. Detective Cooper approached her with a business card for a legitimate financial advisor who helped single parents. "There are people who really want to help," the detective said kindly. "You just have to know where to look." As Thompson was escorted to the prisoner transport vehicle, Judge Mitchell watched from her chamber window. The case had reinforced her belief in the importance of careful observation and the power of truth to eventually surface, no matter how clever the deception. The courthouse slowly emptied as darkness fell, but the impact of the day's events would resonate through the judicial system for years to come. Thompson's attempt to manipulate justice had failed, and in doing so, had only served to strengthen the very system he had tried to deceive. The case of the borrowed baby would become legendary in the annals of Jefferson County Court, a reminder that while justice might sometimes move slowly, it moves surely toward the truth.